Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Azeroth Throwback Thursday with the PwnCastDailyQuest.com. I'm Jaybee, and today I'll be taking you through Tirisfal Glades, a zone that features a very intense atmosphere that gives a dark sense of dread and fear that can really put you on edge. If you're unfamiliar with this area or its location, Tirisfal Glades is located in the northwest portion of the Eastern Kingdoms, and has served as the undead starting zone since the very beginning of World of Warcraft. With that in mind, let's move on to our first area of interest, Deathnell. Deathnell is interesting to me because it provides insight into the early days of the Forsaken and how they started developing their own racial identity. For many newly awakened Forsaken, reaching out to any past friends or family, or anyone living in general, was usually met with violent rejection. After all, many of those people were victims of the Scourge and would be leery of helping the same creatures that had destroyed their lives. In that rejection, the Forsaken lost the only way of life they had ever known, and at a time when they really needed help the most. Many Forsaken attempted to salvage whatever elements of their past lives they could, and if they couldn't reach out to their loved ones, then they would just have to explore other options to help build their new lives. In this case, that meant building their new lives out of their old ones. So, they turned to the remaining buildings that still dotted Lordaeron, even after the Scourge had passed through it. The houses here are broken down, decayed, dilapidated, and just generally look abandoned. Yet the Forsaken of Deathnell still choose to live within them, and haven't built new ones. As a race that values usefulness and efficiency, it makes little sense for the Forsaken to use these houses at all, and that's why I believe that there's some sort of sentimental value attached to these homes, since there definitely isn't any practical value. Having familiar signs of civilization and society around probably helped the initial waves of risen Forsaken retain some sense of normalcy and familiarity. From the decayed and broken remnants of Lordaeron, the Forsaken built a new life, culture, and identity for themselves, which has led to some interesting changes through the story that we'll touch on later on in the video. A very cool town with a lot of history, helps breathe some life into the initial stages of the Forsaken when they were first forming as a race. Very cool town, very much worth your attention. Going on to our next area of interest, the Saladin Farmstead. Here we are at the Saladin Farmstead. I find this area interesting because of the people here. They are one of the last groups of living human beings within the zone, and they have actually gone through very similar trials and tribulations that the Forsaken have. Just like the Forsaken had to cast away past humanity, these farmers had to do so as well in order to survive in these lands. For the Forsaken, that meant accepting the fact that they could not resume their past lives with the living, and then moving on in the face of a world that hated them. For these humans at the Saladin Farmstead, that kind of casting away past humanity means hardening their own feelings of goodwill, mercy, and optimism in order to cope with living in a land that wanted them all dead. Now, countless raids from both the Forsaken and the Scourge have left these farmers stricken with an intense paranoia, turning them hostile and aggressive to all outsiders, including humans of the Alliance. This change that they went through was only exacerbated when they were forced to turn to the Scarlet Crusade for help, another organization that was intensely paranoid, exclusionary, and hostile of all other races or anyone that's not within their own organization. Previously, before their alliance with the Scarlet Crusade, the farmers only had to worry about the Forsaken and the Scourge, but after their alliance with the Scarlet Crusade came through, although it was out of necessity to live, their allegiance has kind of sealed their fate as far as obtaining any sort of peaceful existence with the Forsaken is concerned. It's sad to see people assemble as farmers turn to aggression and fear in the face of such a harsh world. Sad to think about. Anyways, let's move on to our next area of interest, the Agamanda Mills. Here we are. This place probably looks pretty familiar to you if you've quested in this game before, or for a while anyway. So, Agamemnon Mills, a place interesting for two reasons. The first being that it is the last Scourge outpost within the Tirisfal Glades, and the second being that the chain of events that led the Mills into the hands of the Scourge in the first place. Before the Plague and Scourge had completely swept across the land, the Agamemnon family had heard Scourge forces were coming, and decided to attempt to weather the storm, which is kind of weird, even if it required forcing their farmhands to help them weather that storm, which is kind of sad. Well, the family did hold out for a pretty long time, and then was able to stay the Scourge for a bit of time. But the Mills eventually fell at the Scourge after the betrayal of one of their sons, Devlin Agamemnon. Devlin sold out his family to the Scourge for a position of power, and as a result the Mills fell to the undead forces. As you can see, it's quite a large stretch of land. It's quite sprawling. Very large. It might be the only outpost of the only outpost of Scourge in Tirisfal Glades, but it's still fairly large. So, a very sad story to think about. All the poor farmhands that really just wanted to survive were left here and forced to die as well. Here's Devlin down here, if you can kind of see him. His sister should be over here if she's alive. Yeah, Nisa Agamemnon, she's alive there as well. The whole entire family roam the Mills here, as you can see, and their ancestors down there from the crypt are also resurrected by Devlin. They also roam. This guy I wanted to check out. His name is Coleman Farthing. This guy was one of the farmhands for the Agamemnon family whenever he was living, and obviously he died due to being overrun. And whenever he got his will back, he was still quite bitter and salty about being killed as a result of helping the Agamemnons. So you can come over here and quest for this fella and kind of help him in his Batman-esque quest to take down the Agamemnons, and even in Undeath. Very cool guy. Anyways, let's move on to our next destination of interest, Brill. Here we are at Brill. It is probably one of my favorite towns in the game, and it's also the first place that you meet Kel'Thuzad in Warcraft 3 when you're playing the human campaign as Arthas. Now, Brill has two particularly interesting traits about it that really grab me. The first being its role as a massive memoriam for the victims of the Undead Plague in Tirisfal Glades. As you can see, this is kind of represented with this massive graveyard. As you can tell, I would say probably over half the town is a graveyard. And you can tell it's by numerous graves within this little graveyard here that really give you a feeling of how hard the plague hit the Tirisfal Glades. In addition to this, in the graveyard, the winding paths and the morbidly beautiful arches that dot it are pretty cool and add a nice kind of fancy beauty to the graveyard as well. A very interesting portion of it. However, the other half of the town, and also the other half of the reason that I think this place is pretty cool, is it kind of plays into that Forsaken identity thing that I spoke on earlier, and it kind of acts as a metaphor for even further development of that identity. I'm speaking specifically about the architecture and the buildings that you see here. Now, whereas Death Knell represented an uncertain beginning, one clinging to shreds of a past life, Brill represents growth and a new identity being adopted by the Forsaken, one of a restless pursuit of vengeance, as you can tell just through Sylvanas and what she did. Now, with zero ties to the past, and the entirety of eternity ahead of them, the Forsaken need a purpose and a direction. And they eventually took on Sylvanas' own vengeful purpose as their own, in that her quest was to kill Arthas, and that's eventually what they settled on doing as well. This kind of helped her in that regard. Now, the architecture here that you can see gives good insight into the Forsaken's new purpose because of its utilitarian style, its intense dedication to practicality in pursuit of their purpose in the most efficient way possible. See, notice how the electrical orbs on the roof are just right on top of it. Just kind of thrown on there in the way that they just need to be there. Okay. Then look at the alchemical vials and the kind of the fluids off on the side here. You can kind of see them rotating. These elements don't really make for a beautiful building, and nothing has kind of been done to this building to give it a sense of style or any sort of pleasure to being looked at. It's not really nice on the eyes, it's not really easy on it. However, it exists to serve a purpose, and that's it. It has electrical balls and the vials and stuff on it. And see, this aspect of architecture, that kind of the theme of forsaking everything else but the elements that serve a purpose, that serves as a good metaphor for the life the Forsaken have adopted. One that forsakes all the pleasant parts of living and instead focuses relentlessly on their purpose, in this case, vengeance. Which is pretty sad when you think about it, because they've been giving a second chance at life, and instead of finding something worth living for, they just resolve to just look for revenge. Sad when you think about it. Anyway, let's move on to our next area of interest, the Scarlet Monastery. Here we are, the Scarlet Monastery, the religious capital of the Scarlet Crusade, and a location that isn't just interesting because it houses several dungeons. The Scarlet Monastery is a large, grandiose, and beautiful building nestled in the corner of a dead, decayed land, and it seems to exist solely to defy the undead land that encroaches upon it from all sides. In that way, the monastery is a good representation of the work the Scarlet Crusade claims to be doing. A beautiful force of good doing everything they can to push back the undead hordes that encircle them from all sides. Although the Scarlet Crusade's definition of holy, righteous, and good are probably way different from ours, it is still possible to respect their efforts to rebel against a land that seeks to eradicate them. Kind of very similar to the farmers of the Salton farmstead. Besides, this place is a cathedral, and cathedrals always look awesome. Also, it's kind of worth noting that I believe this is the last vestige of living Scarlet Crusaders in the land, which will be touched on in a later video over the Plaguelands. So anyways, moving on to our next destination, the Bulwark. Now here we are. Our last stop is the Bulwark, an area you will probably remember vividly if you have played this game for a while. Now the Bulwark was ran by the Argent Dawn before the Shattering, and it acted as a barrier between the hostile lands of the Scourge-dominated Western Plaguelands and Tirisfal Glades. Now it acts as a barrier between the Forsaken and the Alliance, and the Forsaken have kind of taken over nearly the entire camp. They have literally pushed the remaining Argent Dawn members to a tiny corner of the camp. And this is the reason why I bring this place up, because it represents a kind of last step in the Forsaken realizing their new identity. Now in the days of vanilla, the Forsaken were still very much a fledgling culture, one that had only recently come together under the banner of Sylvanas Windrunner and then joined the Horde, and who subsequently had zero significant presence in the Eastern Kingdoms, due to the weakness of the Forsaken. Now, due to this lack of influence and resources in the Eastern Kingdoms, the Forsaken were unable to mount any sort of huge offense against the Scourge in the Plaguelands, which is the heart of their command, so the Argent Dawn kind of spearheaded that campaign into the Plaguelands. Now, the Forsaken have completely taken over the Bulwark, and repurposed it as their own personal defense against the Alliance, and doing it very much in Forsaken style by parking their own massive plague containers and several plague disseminators nearby. The kind of brazen disregard that allows the Forsaken to park their literal death plague in front of an organization that indiscriminately protects all life on Azeroth says a lot about where the Forsaken are headed as a people and a culture. It is the same kind of audacity that allows Sylvanas to brazenly use her own brand of plague, condemned by the rest of the Horde. But anyways, time will tell where we go from here. So, this has been another episode of Azeroth Throwback Thursday with the PoemcastDailyQuest.com. Once again, I'm Jaybee, and hope you enjoyed. Y'all have a good day.